Hello, I'm Sarah Middleton. I'm the Chief Community Officer for the Digital Preservation Coalition. Thank you so much for inviting me along to talk to you today. Sorry I can't be there in person. I'm afraid I've already headed off on my Christmas hauls, so I'll probably be doing a bit of last-minute shopping or eating a mince pie around about now. But Bryony and Dorothy have asked if I can talk to you about advocacy for digital preservation. So this is what I'm going to do. It's something that we think about a lot at the DPC, something that's sort of high on the list that comes to us from the members, things that they're thinking about too. So we do have a few kind of ideas and tips about how to get started with this task, quite practical stuff. So I hope you find it useful, and this is what I'm going to do just now. So I expect that many of you will be individuals who've inherited or acquired the task of digital preservation as part of your conservation or archivist or library roles. Some of you may be the only people working on digital preservation in your organisations, and I'm sure many of you will have discovered that digital preservation is one of those things you cannot effectively do on your own. It relies on coordinating a range of skills and services from within or outside our organisations. And this means we need as many people as possible to be aware of what it is, why it matters, what it entails, and what you need to do it. And I'm sure I'm preaching to the converted here. I don't need to say these things to you necessarily. But it might be worth noting that actually, as a community, we're probably getting pretty good at approaching digital preservation, technically speaking, and know what we're doing on that side of things. So it's become less of a technical problem and more of a human one. And increasingly, we're having to identify the stakeholders required to enable this process and help them understand how their choices make our digital collections more or less resilient. But where to start with this? So to understand what we're trying to do, let's start by looking at a typical advocacy process. So this graphic shows the cyclical nature of the process and the various steps involved. So I've heard awareness raising and advocacy kind of as terms which are used interchangeably, but here we see that awareness raising is just one of the steps on the way to achieving advocacy. And advocacy is the ultimate goal we seek. By advocacy or by advocate, we mean a person who understands digital preservation, sees the benefits, and is prepared to champion the cause on our behalf. Or it might mean an organisational state where digital preservation is fully embedded. Wouldn't that be amazing? So let's start by looking at this process. We start with the awareness raising, number one, and the goal here is to demonstrate the value of digital preservation, to spread the message as widely as possible, basically, providing educational content, demonstrating benefits, and building relationships with your intended audience. And at this point, the audience will be pretty broad. Next, moving on to engagement, you might have kind of caught the attention of a few kind of key personnel through step one. And at this stage, you would hope to identify and build a deeper relationship with those people who can help to support your cause and introduce them to digital preservation through more targeted messages. Then you'd move on to making the case, all being well. You might be invited to submit a business case or sort of some more formal kind of proposal, at which point you would want to convince these key personnel to provide the resources you need in support of digital preservation. Ultimately coming round to number four and to advocacy, whereby your audience is persuaded absolutely that digital preservation is the thing to do, and they become champions for digital preservation themselves, and they kind of speak about this subject on your behalf or sort of on behalf of the organisation. So through this little presentation, I'm going to look at the when, the who, the what for each stage of the process. So the when are the opportunities for communicating about digital preservation, the who are the audience, who we want to communicate with, who we should be communicating with, and what we say, like how we tailor the messages for each of our audience groups. And keep saying audience, like probably the most important thing to do is to know one's audience, because in order for advocacy to be effective, messages about digital preservation must be relevant to the people you're trying to convince. You need to talk in their language, otherwise, it's just going to go straight over the heads. So the way to kind of figure that out is to start at the end of a communications process with the audience and work backwards. And we do this because everyone interprets communications and messages in a different way. So to understand our audience, we can make sure the message is transmitted accurately and the message is understood as we intend it to. But who exactly makes up these audience groups? So it'll depend from organisation to organisation, of course, but essentially it's whoever you need to persuade to move digital preservation up the agenda. And this might be IT, finance, senior executives, policymakers, budget holders. Each of them will have their own concerns and interests, for example. There's some on the screen here. So you would expect colleagues within your organisation to have sort of aligned and similar interests to you. So they should be fairly easy to persuade. Your IT department are interested in sort of the resources, the technology, the security, and often quite project driven. Finance departments and budget holders obviously are interested in costs, return on investment, and core business, and sort of how that continues ticking along. Senior executives would have a more strategic vision, perhaps more focus on strategic objectives, and so on. You see what I mean. So I wonder, maybe not now, but maybe as your homework, can you complete an exercise in your organisation to identify who your key allies would be? Because this is a really sort of good place to start. Who might clear those blockages that you might currently be experiencing? And then once you know who you need to talk to, can you identify where they'll be so you can take the message to them? Usually starting more informally is best. So at stage 1 of the process, during awareness raising, having an elevator pitch ready up your sleeve, or some sort of key facts and figures is really handy, because bumping into people in the corridor, for example, I'm not sure whether people do this so much anymore with the way that we work kind of more remotely, or on that pre-meeting bit on a Zoom call, or at social occasions if you have them, maybe Christmas drinks down the pub, or on World Digital Preservation Day, for example. That's a great opportunity to kind of pitch something, have a bit of an open forum, but have these messages ready. Then as you move through the cycle, you might want to set up more formal meetings to provide more targeted messages to those key personnel that you've identified and engaged with through that first part of the process. So at every stage, once you know who you're talking to, you can tailor the messages bit by bit to make sure that it's understood by them and they can act upon it accordingly. One of the groups you might need to talk to and get on side are IT, and this can be a challenge. It often comes down to a difference of understanding based on terminology and also in different ways of working. So you might need to find a way to talk in their language. IT colleagues, as I said, tend to work in a very project-centric way, installing systems and keeping the systems running. IT personnel also perform activities that sound a bit like digital preservation, archiving, backup, storage of multiple copies. So there might be a perception that they're already doing this, and some friction when you try to introduce or talk about something that you perceive as different or extra to this, but they don't. And one of the key messages we have here and with IT, for IT, is that digital preservation is not just a one-off, it's an ongoing process. So it does need their assistance and buy-in to think about the long term as well as the here and now. So you can apply the same sort of process that we saw at the start of the presentation, the awareness raising, the engagement, the making the case, the advocacy. It's really, really cool and really useful if you can get IT on board with digital preservation, because they are a great ally to have when talking to the rest of your organisation about this. I've popped a link on the bottom of the slide. It's an article, a longish paper, but full of good tips, full of good ideas about how to talk to IT about digital preservation by Scott Prater. Definitely worth a read. Definitely recommend that. The likelihood is as well that the audiences you're targeting are going to be non-specialists, non-digital preservationists, because otherwise you'd hope that they would already be advocates. So once you know who you need to talk to, find a way to translate what can be quite a technical subject sometimes into a language that can be more easily understood. And the DPC has a suite of notes available for you to use, which covers a range of topics, and they are designed for non-digital preservationists. I see that my face is helpfully covering the link there, but I'll share the slides with you so you can access those. And your organisations will cover a range of remits and digital materials. So once you've identified who you're talking to, we need to sort of find a reason for them to act upon the things that you're saying. So in universities, for example, there's likely to be a requirement to collect and preserve research data, archive special collections materials, library information, university records. Archives have a core mandate to collect, preserve, provide access to a range of materials, political, social, cultural, historical. And libraries have a core mandate to collect, preserve, and provide public access to published works. And digital preservation underpins all of these things. And we know that because while we know that digital preservation is the series of managed activities necessary to ensure continued access to digital material for as long as necessary, for your organisations specifically, digital preservation could mean planning and strategising to sustain access to digital research data for as long as required, and for continuity as well as functionality for future research. It could be part of an ongoing stewardship mission to ensure the future of libraries and archives as memory organisations, which is necessary for libraries and archives to tell the unbroken story of our communities and societies. And you can relate digital preservation to some associated organisational drivers or motivators. So why is your organisation doing what it's doing? These can be identified often in your organisation's strategic plan. So another thing you can do is to have a look through that, take a look at the objectives there and see how digital preservation relates. Some examples listed here are cultural memory, enabling research, reputation, authenticity, accountability, costs. Digital preservation can underpin all of these things. These are motivators or priorities which all influence how an individual makes a decision on behalf of an organisation. And if you're asking for a decision to be made which relates to digital preservation, but digital preservation doesn't appear to fit in with these, it can be conversation over. But we all know, we know that it can support all of these concerns. So these are important factors to consider when crafting targeted messages to your audience. And I want to direct you now to the executive guide on digital preservation, because this provides you with some ready-made, generic and specific messages which have been designed specifically to communicate with senior executives, including messages for the archives, well, for business archives as well, research, higher education, libraries, museums, galleries, and they've all been written by DPC members who represent these various organisation types. Again, helpfully, my head is in the way of the link, so I'll share that with you as well. So, for example, if your organisation is interested in demonstrating, proving the authenticity of its digital objects, you could say that a benefit of effective digital preservation is that you can track unauthorised changes, copies and access, leading to greater trust and assurance in terms of provenance. If cultural memory is top of the list, you can say that digital preservation is able to demonstrate the fulfilment of a legal obligation to display and therefore preserve collection objects in perpetuity, or at least as long as they're needed. If costs are the be-all and end-all, you can demonstrate that digital preservation can cut the costs of viewing rooms open to the public by moving some collections into deep storage, and reduces duplication, of course, which reduces the need for as much storage cost. If enabling research is a priority, you could say that digital preservation can create greater scope for innovation and reuse by preserving cultural and creative data at scale. So these statements are all taken from the executive guide, and you can select from 170 others for those that align best with your organisation and tweak them to suit. So you might use some of these messages to create your elevator pitch so that you have something ready to talk about digital preservation in a language that would resonate with your audience, on a subject matter that resonates with your audience as well. So once you've identified the organisation's motivators, they can be used to create powerful messages about digital preservation to meet the organisation's key concerns. And then what you're doing is not talking about digital preservation itself anymore and the series of managed activities, the features of the process and what it does. We're talking about the benefits associated with the digital preservation. We're talking in the language of your audience. We're talking about authenticity and cultural memory, about cost and enabling research, and how to address that through digital preservation. And we're giving your audience a reason why digital preservation is an essential thing to be doing in your organisation. In theory, messages should contain a clear goal, connection, a call to action, and in theory, messages structured this way should cut through any other noise, any other messages that your audience are being bombarded with, and should be well received and well understood by your audiences. Slight disclaimer that exterior factors outside your control might mean that you need to try this more than once. It might not always hit home first time, but if you follow this kind of pattern, if you follow this this structure, you should have success. So the clear goal should be something achievable as well. You don't want to turn up asking for, you know, the moon on a stick, everything solved all in one go, please. Maybe it's training, maybe it's the opportunity to write a policy, maybe it is a technology, maybe it's another person to support the team, but they should be kind of clear and well scoped and achievable. The connection is what we talked about, like how it relates to the organisation and how digital preservation, how this request is going to support the achievement of the strategic objectives. And then the call to action is what you really want them to do at the end of the conversation. And building your network of advocates is a really great thing to do as well. Because the more the merrier, quite frankly. You can't be everywhere at all times. As we said at the beginning, the likelihood is that you're possibly one on your own or one or two. So the more people that you can engage to share these messages, the better. So to recap, identify your audience, discover what you can about organisational concerns or motivators, tailor your messages to identify and highlight the benefits that can be realised through digital preservation activities. Use what you know, take the opportunities that arise, keep talking. This can be informal, as we said, pre, post, Zooming in the kitchen, corridor, lift, however you work these days. And use these conversations to identify influencers or champions and make arrangements to speak to them more directly, to provide more detail. And then ask for what you want, but be realistic. Having a network of advocates means that you can use their knowledge and connections to reach further and higher into your organisation for you. And by doing this too, the likelihood is that your messages about digital preservation will leak out into other conversations, into the greater consciousness as well. And as I said, the more the merrier. The more people who are persuaded that digital preservation is a good thing, the better, and increases chances of the messages getting to wherever they need to get to. Just before I wrap up, I wanted to point out a few other tools that the DPC has which can be used for advocacy. Apologies that I keep looking over here, it's because I've got two screens. So the DPC Rapid Assessment Model, it's a maturity model for identifying where you sit on a scale of maturity. And you might use this to benchmark your maturity against other organisations, or just simply to show progress and show what you've done with digital preservation, with the resources you were given, and use that as evidence for growth and for progress. If you're a DPC member, we can provide benchmarking information for you, so you can show, you know, we're here, but all of our colleagues are here, you know, and here are the steps that we need to take to get there in the end. The competency framework and competency audit toolkit is a similar kind of step-by-step kind of process model, assessing your readiness as a staff team for taking on digital preservation. It focuses on the fact that one person cannot do digital preservation. It is a team effort, and what the skills are to be able to tackle that problem effectively, tackle the challenge effectively. So it's a great way of making the case for more training, having more people in place, or even just approaching other people in your organisation to say, hey, we could do with your help on this. This impacts digital preservation, and digital preservation impacts your work too. And once you get to this stage, the Digital Preservation Policy Toolkit provides a step-by-step way of building just that, a policy, which can be used to kind of, slide onto the table in one of those more formal meetings and say, look, this is what we think we need. And the business case toolkit, when you come to that as well, is a way to build your business case and have that really focused, really punchy, get the messages across really well. So use that to build your business case there. And we've looked at the executive guide on digital preservation as well. So I hope that was a useful whistle-stop tour of getting started with advocacy for digital preservation. I hope you found that helpful. If you would like more information about the DPC and the resources that we have to offer on this subject, please do get in touch. You can contact me on my email address just there. And thank you very much. Merry Christmas when you come to your own holidays as well. Take care. Hope to speak to you soon. Bye bye.